faster than that. I think you might, you know, miss stuff. You might not have enough time for discussions, things like that. So you want to make sure that you've got enough time left for that. So maybe what we can do is I'll just show a couple slides that we did in the very beginning, just so Manny can get up to speed. And then Alicia and Nicole, they can access this right now, right? That was very science fiction.
Yes.
Sounded like that come from Mike.
It did. I'm trying to, my computer is not running right with the internet, and I'm using my phone, and I'm trying to see which one's going to work better here.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone, except for the instructors, of course.
All right, Manish, is that you?
Yes, it's me.
Okay. So they can, this is available for them to get online now, right? If they wanted to download the PowerPoint?
Yep, everything is located in the LMS.
Okay, so Manny, you can go ahead and download that, and you'll at least be able to go through, you know, the first module.
Okay.
It's a course that's developed and delivered into 4 modules. We're in the second one today. The first one introduces what PCBs are and where you're likely to find them and why they're around and all that other kind of stuff.
Okay.
All right, let's see. Manisha, why don't we, if everybody's taking the poll, why don't we show the results of this poll up, and then maybe Jim and Wayne can sort of start the day off with just a little discussion around the poll.
Okay, Nicole?
Ah.
He has access to the polls. For some reason, it's not
Well, that,
see anything, even though it's so weird.
Can you see it, Manisha?
I can't on my end. I think
Okay.
I have access to it.
Yeah, we can see it. Can everybody else see it, the poll results? Well, I'd say that's unanimous, 100%. Right, so this is definitely something that, you know, IUPAT members, you know, have worked around. You will continue to work around. So Jim and Wayne, you guys want to say anything about maybe what we covered yesterday and kind of the gist of things here for the IUPAT?
You want to, Wayne?
Well, just that, just like to have some of the feedback from other participants, just knowing, you know, that poll question, why do they think they were around it? Was it ever tested, or are you just, after yesterday, are you just assuming that you were around it?
Anybody?
I would assume we're around it because it's pretty much everywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's on everything, I guess. It's pretty much everywhere. You can't run away from that.
The big thing too, Tiago, is that stuff migrates. It'll go down into concrete and everything else. So you're basically rubbing it off every time you walk down a set of handrails or something like that, if it's present. And the only way we know it's present if they turn around and test it.
Wow.
Yep.
And they're not required to test it. So if you think about it, the general duty clause on OSHA,
all the SSPC sign-in sheets and stuff go back to SSPC.
do what, Nicole?
Sorry guys, just ignore me. I'm handling an SSPC crisis at the moment.
All right. What does the general duty clause tell you guys in OSHA? Eastern? Does anybody know? Mike, you ought to know that.
I should, but I'm not sure what you're looking for, my friend.
What it tells us that we have to make sure our employees are in a workplace that's safe and not any hazards. So how are you going to know if there's hazards if you don't test for it?
You won't. You need to test for everything, correct?
Or we assume that's there?
No, you need to test.
So this is a good can of worms that Jim is opening up here.
Yes.
And this is one of the hearts of labor, right? So imagine this. So you take this class, or one of your members takes this class because you put it on, and they say, well, geez, I'm working in a building, you know, that was built in 1975. I'm going to be, you know, scraping down some walls or repainting something or whatever, right? And I'm going to wear a respirator and some other PPE because, you know, I think that PCBs might be here. And the boss comes around and says, no, you can't wear that stuff. You're going to freak people out. And say, yeah, but I want to protect myself. Oh, no, there's no PCBs here. Well, show me the test results. Well, we don't have to test. So now we're stuck, right? So one of the things that we've talked about in this class, and that we'll get into more tomorrow, is, well, what do you do in that moment? How are you going to protect yourself? Your employer is saying, don't put that on. You're going to freak the teachers out and the parents at the school.
You should be able to go to a safety person and tell them that there's a problem that you think that might be a problem and you want to be protected for it. And if he doesn't do anything, then you go to your supervisor or somebody that's higher up than him, go through a chain of command. And if nobody can do anything, then you got to go to OSHA.
Now, one of the ways to look at this, if they say, well, why do you think there's a problem? You say, well, because this building was built in 75, and I know that PCBs were banned in 1979, so they're likely in here because they're in all caulking, paints, etc., you know, of this nature at this time period. So unless you can prove otherwise, and that's very good backup for you in asking them to fulfill your request, right? Because we know this. So the only way out of it for them is to test and to show you definitively it's not there. Now, what happens if they're just, they're company supervisors or contractor supervisors, you're not getting anywhere with them? What would you do next?
Or see the person that owns the place, or the person that's buying the service that you're putting out, and ask them if there are any.
How about a union rep, like a union health and safety rep, or something like that, so you can get backup, right? Now, instead of just you or that worker saying it, now your local is like, yep, by the way, we teach a class on PCBs, and this is exactly what happens. And you should be thanking, Mr. or Mrs. IUPAT member, because they just potentially prevented a release of this material at your school, right? So figure out what your method is for getting, the union involved if you have an issue like that. Jim or Wayne, do you guys want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, the big thing, if you turn around and you test for it and it comes back hot or positive for the PCBs, the school has to take care of it then. That's according to the EPA. And when that happens, what's that going to do to the kids that's in that school? We'll be in the same predicament we're now, that they're not going to be able to go in that school. The question is, do we want our kids in that school if it's positive? And there's a lot of people that wants to get rid of their kids every day. So.
But also on that same thing though, Jim, I would think that it would be a win-win for the contractor, because that'd be a huge change order if he's capable of doing it.
And then in turn, what's that going to do for the contractor? It's going to make him more money, and in turn, it's going to make us more money. Am I right, Wayne?
I agree.
I think maybe could shut the job completely down and you won't have anything. So it can go either way. I guess you got to weigh your apples and oranges. The first thing is you're saving your people, or kids or whatever. And but it can be a loss of a job. First of all, it's going to take a while to analyze how much are you going to do, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. So if it's $100,000, I can see it easily going up to $1 million. That's just my personal feeling. or do you not touch it and just leave it alone? So it's a possibility they could lose it.
Well, on that same note though, Rick, if it's starting to degrade, they have to do something once they test it, whether they got to relocate everybody or they just can't let it sit there.
Right. But if they ain't got the money, what are you gonna do?
Well, on this note, why don't we start our slides here? I'm going to jump back just to the beginning a little bit and go through quickly for Manny so you can just see where some of this stuff is located. And then we'll get right into the toxicology, environmental module, and we're going to be going through activity 2 today at the end of the module. So I will start to share my screen here.
Toxicology.
All right, everybody see this okay? This is where our activity was. So just as a quick review and an introduction for Manny. So PCBs, they were pretty much invented and they started the production of them back in the 1920s, 1926. And a lot of them were made by Monsanto, about 99% of them by weight. And they were banned eventually in 1979 because they were found to be incredibly toxic. And it took a while to do that because it was known to be toxic for workers, the public, and the environment back in the 1930s. And these are some of the places that you'll find them. So dielectric fluids, 28% were used in ingredients for manufacturing products, rubber, plastics, adhesives, paints, inks. You can see the rest of the stuff there on the screen. So a lot of the stuff that, you know, that IUPAT members might work around. 12% of them were in hydraulic and heat transfer fluids. And then, you know, they're in coatings. And they can still be in coatings today, even though they're banned, which is, I love it. I love it when you got a law protecting somebody. There's always this, yeah, but what about this part? So you can have them in coatings at 25 milligrams per kilogram and a maximum of 50 milligrams per kilogram for pigments. So you got to look at safety data sheets. They were added you know, for these kinds of reasons here and in this kind of stuff. They're added as plasticizers. It did a lot of good stuff for the coatings themselves. It just happened to be bad for the environment and for people, just like asbestos and lead, right? They had a structural kind of manufacturing benefit for the products that used asbestos and lead, but they killed people. This is an example of some of the amounts that were in some common paint companies, especially green paint. And this is very telling because here we've got we've got 4 different types of paint. And we can see there are different levels of PCBs, up to 5,200 parts per million. So unless you tested every different paint surface, which is what I would do if I was asked to do this. And there is actually an EPA testing protocol, just like there is for lead and asbestos, although it's not the law like it is for lead and asbestos. But we would get into that in the worker class, which is the abatement class. So these things were, you know, created quite a bit. Here's a short list of materials that contain them. You see window glazings, you know, paints, coatings, ceiling tiles, flooring materials, flooring mastics, window and door caulking, structural fireproofing stuff. So, I mean, you use pretty much almost everything here, right? As an IUPAT member with one of the trades or another. And they can also be in a lot of the similar household products. So that's just a review, and this is another good one, Manny, what we can focus on here for you. So this is a school, and we have different materials on this building, on the outside of the building, that they sampled for, right? And so we see that some of the caulking was between 4 and 45, 48 parts per million of PCBs. Some of it ranged up to 40,000 parts per million. All right, so that's a pretty significant swing. And if you're going to be working with that stuff, generating airborne material, that's a pretty significant exposure risk for you as a worker, not to mention the public around and, contaminating the environment. That's why, we wanted to develop a worker course after this one, because we want to make sure that we've got, a cadre of IOPAT members that are skilled at abating PCB materials, just like, they are for lead and asbestos. And this is just, these photos here, these came from a school where they actually did sampling and they found stuff out, what the levels were. When the stuff deteriorates, it can crack and fall on the ground. Jim mentioned this, PCBs, because they are fluid, even though they're, they appear to be solid. They can migrate just like oil can into porous surfaces like wood, concrete, and brick. And typically, if you're going to find PCBs, you'll probably find lead and asbestos too, because it all came out and was used in the same time period. And all those things were banned within the same 2-year period, 1978 and 79. Here's some leaking PCB ballast oil. This is from Wayne's garage. No, from Wayne's Trading Center.
It was only partial of the stuff I got in my garage.
We were able to dig around and find some older stuff at the training center there. And this made for a great photo. So, you might have this stuff hanging around. All right, Manny. So that was the quick, 30-second or whatever it was, flyby session on PCBs. But, download the material, go through them yourself if you can before tomorrow. That would be great. But now let's get into why we're concerned.
Okay. Yep. Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah.
You are welcome. All right, so we're going to look at toxicology and environmental aspects. So this here, is a graph of bioaccumulation, right? So the stuff pollutes, and it's not just with PCBs. Other chemicals do this as well that are persistent or that stick around in the environment. So it gets into the water supply, the little tiny microbes eat it, then your plant plankton and then your animal plankton ingests that stuff. Then your bigger creatures start to ingest that stuff. Then the little fish, big fish, etc. Then birds and bigger mammals. And all of a sudden, if you want to eat yourself a nice large tuna, you're going to be getting a good dose of PCBs because it bioaccumulates. This is especially if you've taught HAZWOPER and or lead, and asbestos, or other toxic classes, right? This issue is no secret to us, right? There's typically 4 ways that you can get things into your body: inhalation, absorption, ingestion, and injection. Which one do you think is the worst one as far as PCB exposure is for concerning workers?
Inhalation.
Inhalation, yep. How come? Why would you choose that one?
That's the most common route, I guess. Everything, even if you'll pretty much smell everything. I mean, everything goes through your nose. You can, even though some of the guys might still have the respirator on, and it's probably not sealed as supposed to be sealed, and they can still have that. Just like when lead, when you see your nose, the side of your nose is all black, that means you still haven't been properly being using, or your respirator is not sealed tight.
Yep. So, but you're right on the money. So inhalation hazard is typically the worst for PCBs for workers. And it's like that with most chemicals, not everything. One of the reasons why is, you said it, we breathe a lot, right? But our lungs, if you were to spread them out, they cover about the area of a tennis court, about 140 square meters. So there's a lot of surface area for chemicals to interact with when you breathe it in. And our lungs don't have as many defense mechanisms as if we ingest something. So our metabolic processes, going through our system through the ingestion route is a little different. For example, if you were to inhale elemental lead, about 90% of it gets taken up into your body. The other 10% gets excreted. If you ingest lead, only 60% of it gets taken up into your body and 40% of it gets excreted. So you've got some different mechanisms working in your favor when you eat stuff. But we shouldn't be eating hazardous chemicals, obviously. However, my next question addresses this. How about for the general public? What do you think the greatest exposure route is?
Abortion.
Not ingestion. And we're going to find out why in a minute, which is quite unfortunate. But besides, for workers, for inhalation, you can absorb this stuff through your skin. It is skin absorptive, and it also can damage the skin. We're going to look at that. So that's why if you're working with this stuff, you want to make sure not just that your lungs are protected, but also that your skin is protected as well.
Hey, Bernie, also on that, these guys, eventually you'll get the instructor notes. And one of the things that jumped out in my mind is you don't even think of how many breaths you take in a day. But in the notes, it says you take 20 to 25,000 breaths in a day. And that's moving an awful lot of liters of air. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons inhalation is the number one.
Yes, indeed. Good times, right? We got to protect those lungs. So this was brought up yesterday, right? I think somebody asked this question, and I think it was Jim that said, yes, indeed. So we all have PCBs in our body, unfortunately. It should not be there. We were not born with them. As we discussed yesterday, PCBs are not natural chemicals. They are man-made. They are synthetic, organic, man-made chemicals. So unfortunately, we've all got some level of this in our body. We can see what is in our food. So to further the last question I just asked, the most common route for the public is ingestion. So if you like salmon steaks, it's got the highest contamination in the meat. So this is in nanograms per serving, and I think a serving is like 8 ounces or 6 ounces, so not much. So if you're like me and you like to go back to the serving platter more than once for maybe 2 servings of salmon or steak or what have you, you're getting higher dose every time you eat. Canned tuna is way up there. Vegetables, something that folks don't usually consider to be contaminated, but we use pesticides on them, and just like plants suck water up, they suck up contaminants. In fact, in environmental remediation, sometimes a method that's used to remediate chemicals from the ground is to plant certain species of vegetation because it does a good job wicking up the toxic materials, and then they basically harvest those toxic plants and get rid of them, right? So vegetables can be contaminated. Chicken breast, pancakes. Oh God, you're gonna attack pancakes too, PCBs? How dare you? But what are they made out of, right? They're made out of flour, and what's that made out of? Meatloaf. Now, meatloaf, that probably could be considered a hazardous food substance no matter what's in it, because meatloafs often can be suspect, at least the stuff that I grew up with. Eggs. It's in eggs. And so what we're going to learn about tomorrow is the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, actually has, unfortunately, different limits of PCBs in food, which is crazy, right? That they have to have limits on how much you can have of PCBs in food.
So Bernie, that must be why the FTI offers biscuits and gravy every morning for breakfast. Look where that is on the list.
I know, huh? Brown gravy, 180 nanograms. Caramel candy. Yep. Another concerning thing, we'll look at this in a few more slides down, but human breast milk. So mothers who are nursing, if you've got an infant, the stuff, if it's in your body, it's going to come through breast milk, which is not good, because as we know, right, kids usually suffer health effects from toxic materials at a much different degree than adults do. So, they're toxic to aquatic life, and it can later harm us through our diet. And it can either, kill aquatic life there on the spot, or it can stay and infest and magnify up the food chain and reach us that way. So environmental contamination, worker and public exposure, can happen in a couple of different ways. So here's an example of, coating on a bridge that's laden with PCBs. So it can leach off of that coating, right? So basically the water is running onto that surface, onto that coating. It's basically dissolving very small amounts, right? But it happens day after day after day. So it's dissolving that chemical, and that's getting into the environment that way. So it can happen by leaching. Dust. So, how does dust get produced? Vibration constantly, right, over the bridge. Paint chips, so it starts to deteriorate. It's, maybe the owner of the bridge municipality doesn't keep it up well, so more paint chips fly off. So that's a similar method to dust, but in bigger, bigger chunks. Stormwater. So once this stuff gets, washed away in water, and now it can start to get distributed, throughout the region through, runoff from stormwater, and then it can go down the drains as well. So we can see this is one example, right, through a bridge, but just imagine anything outdoors that's coated with a PCB laden paint, right? Tanks, superstructure tanks, rail cars, right? It's endless. Another issue. We've known about this now for 40 or 60 years, that just because a chemical is used in one part of the globe doesn't mean it stays there. One of my undergraduate college professors, Dr. Rob Goebel, real great teacher. He was one of the first ones to measure radionuclides in Colorado that came from Chernobyl. So you have the Chernobyl nuclear accident, and it didn't stay there. It didn't stay in Russia. It got up into the atmosphere, and those radiological particles floated around the globe, and we were able to measure them in the United States and Colorado. Same thing happened during the Fukushima Daiichi nuke plant in Japan, when that melted down due to the earthquake and the tsunami that happened. We were able to measure radionuclides from that plant here on the soil of the United States. So just because a chemical is released in one spot doesn't mean it's going to stay there. So let's look at this graphic here, because it's pretty telling. And I'll just point out right away that North Korea is still producing PCBs. So the only country in the world is North Korea that's still doing that. We gave a reference to this yesterday here, down the bottom. Where's my mouse? Here we go. In several African countries, cooking oil on local markets contain pure PCB formulations. Right? So they're using this stuff literally to cook food, And what it means to be a PCB formulation is that, remember, all PCBs are a mixture of a bunch of different PCBs. You just don't have straight Alcor, right? You've got a mixture of a bunch of different PCB conjugars in there. Some Nigerians treat their skin with PCB transformer oils to leave it soft and to gradually achieve a bleaching effect. In 2015, an electrical station in Paraguay, where 20,000 transformers stored, caught on fire. So imagine that. What happens when something catches on fire? Where does the smoke go? Up in the air, right? Gets distributed around. Transformers containing PCBs are still used in Havana, Cuba. Negative health effects of PCBs have been documented in Arctic top predators such as polar bears. 90% of German sheep livers have concentrations of PCBs above food safety tolerance limits. So imagine that. So mutton's a pretty tasty food. I like me some lamb every now and then. But imagine that. So 90% of the German sheep population is contaminated above recommended food levels.
Why do you think that is, Bernie?
They eat grass.
Yeah, it come from the Nazis back in World War II. What do you think of that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much, particularly and why, Nazi Germany would have used it more than anybody else, but I don't know enough about that contamination. All I can tell you without a doubt is that sheep eat grass, right? So because it gets in the food supply, not just for us as humans, but for animals, it bioaccumulates. And consider this, 90% of those sheep livers are above, the safe tolerant limits. What about the other 10%? Are they free of PCBs?
No.
Nope. They still got them in there. It's just, less. One last example here. In Sri Lanka, certain welders prefer working with PCB oils because these are cheaper than ordinary cooking oils, cooling oils. So this is just a handful of examples. All around the world, there's issues with PCBs. That's one of the reasons there is this world effort to get them all out of circulation across the globe by 2028. They are a significant environmental pollutant and toxic, and they affect humans to a great degree. All right, so here are some potential pathways and how these things can get out there. So you can have runoff, right? So you can contaminate the ground, and then, rainwater comes by, collects with this stuff, and it's gonna go wherever the rainwater is going. Hazardous waste sites containing PCBs, and also landfills that contain PCB products, right? How many times is just regular caulking thrown out in a construction landfill? That's not a hazardous waste landfill, and it's certainly not a PCB regulated landfill. And if it was caulking that came below 1982, right? Give us a couple extra years for after they banned them, it's gonna run off. Burning of waste in incinerators and release into the air and deposited on the ground and water from building materials and other PCB products. So here's an example, right? Somebody has not been doing a good job at this building, making sure that operations and maintenance of facilities is in good order. Look at all the oil leaking out of this thing, right? So this is a way that we create pathways to have this into the environment. Once they do pollute the environment, huge cleanups are needed. I mentioned this yesterday out in the Berkshires and the Hudson River Valley, Massachusetts and New York. Because of the contamination that GE produced out there, they're still cleaning up those areas, even now. And I know the state of New York is still in lawsuits with GE, getting them to pay for all the mess they made. So literally, here's an example of a river that they had to divert the water and suck it dry so they could literally scoop out the river basin. Wasn't enough just to dredge it with flotation vessels. They actually had to do something a little more drastic here. Here we got example again, the same project. This is out in the Hudson River Valley. Basically, they drain the river so they can vacuum up the PCBs, because this stuff it's heavy. It sinks to the bottom, it gets into the sediment. Very difficult to get up. So there's a picture of me for Thursday out in the boat. So this stuff's going to bioaccumulate. So I don't know how many people here enjoy fishing. I don't know how many people who do that and also enjoy eating it. Like I said, I'm hoping to bring home plenty of haddock on Thursday to enjoy. And I know it's going to come with some risk, because it's going to, so this is the crazy thing, right? Eating fish is good for our blood. It's good for our heart, good for our skin. The fatty acids in fish, very good for us. The problem is that PCBs like to store in fat. So those fish that are good for us, our body also has to deal with the contamination that's in those fish. So how about that for a catch-22? Some places, fish and other seafood, it's not safe to eat. So, typically what happens, when you go get a fishing license, you should get a booklet, right? And in that booklet, it tells you the rules, where you can fish, what you can, catch for size limits, what the seasons are, all that stuff. It's also going to list in there bodies of water that you should not eat fish in and why. You'll see, PCB contamination, methyl mercury contamination, things like that. Or there might be an advisory. So, maybe you can eat so many ounces of fish a week from that body of water. Sometimes you'll see that if you are pregnant, do not eat any fish from that body of water because of pollutants that contaminated the fish. So just be aware, if you like to, do that as an activity, where you're catching your fish from. So as I said, they mainly concentrate in fat, but they also concentrate in the liver. It's one of the reasons they were looking at sheep livers as far as gauging food contamination there in Germany. So some of it's excreted. It also concentrates in breast milk. So again, if you have an infant and they're nursing, if the mom has body burden, and body burden means it's the amount of toxic chemical that your body hangs on to. So that's the amount that doesn't get metabolized, it doesn't get excreted, it's stored in your body. And it comes out over time. So, if the nursing mother has a body burden of PCBs, it can be passed on through the breast milk. The more chlorine atoms in a PCB congener is going to be more severe to the body as far as health effects. So something like PCB 209 is going to be a lot more toxic to your body than PCB 77. It's all bad, but the higher laden chlorine atom PCBs are worse. And as we discussed yesterday, they also are more persistent. They stick around in the environment more. They have higher boiling points, and they are less volatile. So if you've got building materials that were made with higher chlorine-based atoms, it's going to be a bigger problem for you, both as a worker and for the public. Question? No? Okay. This is really important to understand. This is a biological half-life. If you've worked in radiological sites, you might remember, a radiological half-life. It's sort of the same thing. So the biological half-life means the amount of days it's going to take for half of that material inside your body to leave. It's either going to leave by the direct material itself. So for instance, you get lead in your body, lead leaves your body, or maybe you get the substance in, it gets metabolized into a different substance, like my margaritas that I had yesterday. Yes, I had more than one. I said margaritas. After this class, who could blame me? Right, Wayne?
You got it.
So grain alcohol, it metabolizes into acetaldehyde, which is the problem for hangovers. So yes, you're a little dehydrated, which I was not. But the problem is it metabolizes into something that we embalm bodies with, right? Formaldehyde, acetaldehyde is very similar. So it actually is poisoning your body when it metabolizes grain alcohol, like my tequila, to try to eliminate it. So sometimes your body is going to eliminate that chemical directly. Sometimes it is going to biotransform it or metabolize it to a different chemical to eliminate it. And two things can happen. That metabolite can be worse for you than the compound that your body's trying to get rid of. Or it could be less toxic for you. But the goal is your body knows it should not be there and it's trying to get rid of it. So let's take a look at this. And this is, again, really important because if you're going to be exposed to this stuff as a worker, or if you're going to be exposed to it as the public, you get it into your body, it is not going to be easy to get it out. So what this means is, let's say you get an initial amount of, let's say 100 milligrams of PCBs into your body, right? So maybe you were removing caulking, sanding down a wall or something, whatever. You get 100 milligrams of PCBs in your body. After one half-life, so after 450 days, which is more than a year, half of those PCBs are left. So now your body is down to 50 milligrams. After another 450 days, 25% is left in your body. So now you're down to 25 milligrams. After another 450 days, you're down to 12% or 12 milligrams. And after another 450 days, you're down to 6 milligrams. One more half-life, you're down to about 3 milligrams. Once you reach 10 half-lives, which would be 4,580 days, they say that it's about all, for most intents and purposes, it's all about eliminated from your body. But imagine that. So if you get it in one dose, it's going to take 4,500 days to almost completely remove PCBs from your body. Any problems here?
How do it comes out of your body?
Good question. So it's going to come out of your body through feces and urine. But look at this sentence. This example represents one dose. So one time you get it into your body. But what if you keep having a dose day after day? So let's say if your job takes 30 days and you're exposed to this for 30 days. So on day one, I'm pointing to the screen like you can see me. I keep forgetting that I'm not in front of a class. So day one, right? This is where you start. But day two, then you go back and start here again, and day one is here, right? So you keep going on this cycle. So every time you have a new exposure and more stuff gets into your body, you're starting a brand new series of half-lives. So it's not like you're just getting one exposure, you're continuing this. Now, what's going to happen is the amount in your body, let's say if you get 100 milligrams in your body, right? After one half-life, so 450 days goes by, if you keep getting exposed, you're going to have more than 450 milligrams in your body. It's going to be some amount 10 times higher. So there's a calculation that we can do to find out how much you might have stored in your body based on your exposure. But for intents and purposes, it's going to be a lot more than your initial exposure day, right? So this is a continuing cycle. The only time it's going to stop is when you stop being exposed. And then you have to wait from that last exposure to 10 half-lives after that last exposure until you can be somewhat PCB free. How do you feel about that? And this ties all back into, you don't know if you're working with it if nobody's testing for it. All we can do is, as someone said, I'm going to assume it was there because the building was built in 1975 or 1960 or whatever. Wade and Jim, do you want to chime in on this issue at all?
Jimmy told me take M&M peanut to get rid of it. Is that true?
What's that?
Jimmy told me that if you eat M&M peanuts, you can get rid of it. I'm kidding.
The big thing you need to look at, guys, how many bridge painters we got?
A lot.
And what they usually work 7 to 8 months a year. Am I right, Wayne?
Yeah, about that, depending on where you live.
And they're going to work 7 days a week. And they're getting exposed every day on some of these old bridges. And then you got the guys that works the dams, the powerhouses. They're getting doses. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So
Now,
while you were talking, I did the quick math, and the 450 days times the 10 different half-lives, that's 12 years, 3 months. If
Yeah.
you never get exposed again before it's non-traceable.
Wayne, are we related? I did the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's great minds. I don't know. Think alike.
Don't go there.
So think about that then. After you retire, you're probably still eliminating this stuff, right? That's why we want to make sure that we start to do what we need to do to start protecting workers on this right now. And not for nothing, Ricky, I was trying to think of where you're going with that because it was true that certain chemicals that were toxic were found in M&M candy coatings about 5 years ago. So
But remember the green color. You got to remember also with the M&Ms, the green color is probably going to have the most PCBs from the previous slide.
That's what.
Oh, sorry, I brought it up.
Yeah. Hey, I'm not like probably the other industrial hygienist you might have met. All right, so let's get back to this though. So this is an issue. We do not want to get any of this stuff into our body. Now that's just the working part of us. Now if I'm gonna, I love salmon and I'm screwed because I've got a lot of PCBs in my body right now from salmon, right? And it's tough because it's healthy for you in one instance, but on the other instance, I'm burdening my body with PCBs. All right, so let's keep going on. So remember, it's not one and done, right? Day after day, if you're working around this stuff, you are adding to your body burden and it's slowly leaving your body. For an example, the half-life of asbestos is 77 days. And we know how toxic that is, right? This is 450 days. The half-life of lead is 27 days. All this stuff is really toxic, but the problem is PCBs is going to stay in your body longer and promote its toxic effects for a longer time. So I know Jimmy, Jim alluded to this yesterday. He said PCBs, lead and asbestos, this stuff is nastier. I would have to agree, based on how this acts in your body and the kind of health effects that we see, and we'll get into that here. So due to the complexities of PCBs and similar compounds like DDT, things like that, TCDD, which is another, I had to write that one down. Hold on a minute here. I didn't write out TCDD. It's a long acronym for an organic chemical. These things interact. Wait, what's that?
It's a tick dope.
It's really difficult to, prove what the harm is from this stuff, right? Because you've got these interactions of other chemicals that are in the environment. Also, unfortunately, this brings us right back to not testing. So let's say if you got sick and you're sick with a disease that PCBs can cause, and you know that you've been working as, let's take our bridge example. You've been working on bridges for half your career. And you say, oh, I think I got it from PCBs. And the employer can say, well, we never found any PCBs. Well, did you test for it? So how are you going to prove your case of, and again, it always goes back to the employer is responsible for protecting your health and safety on the job. So how are you going to prove without testing and sampling that you were exposed to PCBs, even though we know they were there? Right, so this is a good example of why we really need that law, just like we have for lead and asbestos. And we'll get into covering the law that we do have, because we do have a permissible exposure limit for two concentrations of PCBs. We'll get into that more tomorrow. But it's difficult to prove harm from PCBs, especially at low limits, because of these things we discussed. There are similar chemicals that also act synergistically and additively, and we'll talk about that in a second, and we don't test for them. All right, now the bad news on top of the bad news. Here are most of the health effects. There are additional ones, but I don't have enough slide space. So some known effects, we've got cancer, headaches, dizziness, nervousness, fatigue, low birth weights, poor infant habituation, endocrine disruption, so your what's the word I'm looking for? Your system that fends off, colds and all that good stuff. Immune system, thank you, Wayne, gets disrupted. Your thyroid system can be disrupted. Chloracne, so you can have a really nasty skin disease. Possible effects, and I say possible because my thought is usually when I see this word is after a few more studies or a few more years of study, that possible is going to move into known effects. And I don't want to be a guinea pig, and I don't want to see workers be used as guinea pigs until the possible moves into the known. Liver and kidney damage, reproductive damage, respiratory illnesses. It can cause asthma, decreased learning potential, learning and developmental disabilities for kids, and it adds to depression and aggression. So there's a lot of health effects for PCBs. And when we look at lead and asbestos, they're still bad, but there's, probably 5 apiece.
But on this same slide, Bernie, This is why it's important, and my reasoning is to have it tested, is this masks a lot of things that bridge painters are working with every day, lead. So if you actually got PCB poisoning and you got liver and kidney damage, especially kidney, they're going to put you on chelation. And the chelation probably isn't going to help you with the PCB poisoning.
You're correct. So chelation, what Wayne's referring to, it's a chemical. It's usually toxic to the body, but not as toxic as what you're trying to get rid of. So it's not a fun thing to go through, but necessary. So chelation, it likes the chemical it's trying to find. So like with lead, it's going to like lead a lot, it's going to latch onto it, and it's going to help your body eliminate it. There is a method for getting PCBs out of the body as well, but I don't have it off the top of my head. So you need a different method for doing that. And Wayne's absolutely right. And look at, so lead causes neurological issues, right? So doesn't PCBs. So how do you know if you're getting affected by lead or PCBs or both if you're having, depressive states and things like that? Maybe you're diagnosed with depression, or you're having issues controlling your temper or your emotions. Lead can cause that. PCBs can cause it. As Wayne said, you get both on a bridge, right? And so this actually, I have a question for you, for Jim and Wayne. Is there a system that the IUPAT has for screening workers who historically worked with certain chemicals like lead or asbestos or radiological materials?
Well, just every year when the bridge painter goes out, he's supposed to have a pre-hire physical.
Okay. And do they do like a blood workup and stuff?
Yes,
I mean,
they do.
they need to for lead.
Yep.
But PCBs, they don't have to.
Right.
Right. Something to think about when we want to draft the language for that law, right?
Correct.
Other stuff here. So exposure to PCBs may result in some serious health effects. I went over, some of them. So acute ones. And what does acute mean? It means you get a higher dose and you feel the effects right away, right? So within minutes to hours, maybe a couple days. Skin, eye, and throat irritation, breathing difficulties. So what if you already have asthma and you're being exposed to this? It can make it worse. Nausea and vomiting, weight loss, stomach pain, and some of the chronic or long-term, where typically it's lower doses over a longer period of time that you might work. And usually chronic diseases don't go away. Acute things typically do go away, right? Unless it's so acute like a burn or maybe a broken leg, it might cause some lasting damage. But for the most part, if you're having throat irritation and you remove yourself from the exposure, that goes away at some point. But these chronic diseases, no. You get cancer, you got cancer. You got to fight to get rid of it. Reproductive damage, liver damage, etc. Just a couple examples of some of the cancers: non-Hodgkin lymphoma, melanoma, breast cancer in both men and women. And in fact, I did find a breast cancer study in male painters that was done in the EU. So there was an issue there. There was a cluster of painters that developed breast cancer who was working with what they believe was PCBs. Liver cancer, and the biliary tract. So the stuff that sort of processes your waste in your colon to help get that moving out. It can negatively affect your immune system. Some of the evidence of this, based on studies of communities that consumed contaminated food with PCBs. Increased susceptibility to infections were reported. Neurological effects. So this can affect, our brain and systemic nervous system. So one thing I'll point out, that second bullet includes abnormal reflexes, memory, learning. Reflexes. So I'm pretty sure painters get up on ladders every now and then, yes? Right? So you need agility and flexibility and reflexes for doing that kind of stuff, right? It is work, even if you set your ladder up in a safe way and you work on it on a safe way. it still requires for you to balance and all that other stuff. So what if those, physical attributes of you are damaged because of PCBs? And you fall off your ladder and somebody breaks their neck and they die. And so they go, the autopsy's done, and the medical examiner says this worker fell off the ladder and the cause of death was broken neck. Was it really a broken neck? Could it have been through PCB disease, right, that caused neurological deficit and caused the fall? So this is an issue too with understanding how workers get harmed, because we rely on other people that aren't necessarily versed in occupational medicine or industrial hygiene. A good example is heat stress. We're going to be doing a heat stress DOT seminar, I think July 29th, and then we're going to do a heat stress class in early August. People who die of heat stroke sometimes are misclassified. I've got a great case study, and I only say great because it helps save other workers down the road. It's a great case study because a worker suffered heat stroke in Hanford, Washington, out in the desert, fell off a ladder, later died from the fall. And luckily, the medical examiner was able to correlate the temperature and the weather conditions and the other issues with the body, and said this person died of heat stroke and then fell off a ladder. So was able to correctly classify the actual cause of death, which has a lot of implications for, potential issues with insurance and, culpability, who's held responsible, et cetera. So this was a worker that wasn't getting good heat stress control. Fine to be up on the ladder. It wasn't a tall ladder either. They were disassembling portable office buildings. So we're talking about 6 to 8 feet up maybe. So it's important that we understand actually what affected the worker if they might have an accident or, God forbid, a fatality. I'm going to thank Dan Penske Jr. for this. He threw this picture of chloracne in here. I tried to avoid it. I had the slide up, but with no photos. This can create a particularly nasty skin disease. So this is an example of an herbicide production worker. So not somebody who just sprays with it. They actually make the chemical that somebody would go and spray. But you can get chloracne from having exposure to PCBs at different levels. And I'm not going to tell you what the level is going to be because I don't know, right? We all act a little differently. This is something that could happen if you're having, chronic or subchronic exposure to PCBs. It's not likely to happen from a couple of exposures. This is something that's a little bit longer term. Teratogens. So for folks that might have taken a HAZWOPER class, like a 40-hour class, you might have went over teratogens. So what's a teratogen? It's a big class of disease-causing chemicals like carcinogens are. Can somebody know what a teratogen is? A teratogen is something that causes developmental or defects in the womb for the fetus that's growing in the womb. Different than reproductive effects. So that's stuff that can affect a reproductive system, make it less likely for a couple to conceive. Also might pass on a defect or something like that. That's different than teratogens. So these are chemicals that will affect the growing fetus in the womb. So some of the things that we've seen is delayed developmental effects, intelligence deficits, behavioral problems, low birth weights, smaller head size, a shorter gestational age, and cognitive and motor skill deficiency. So luckily, that's the end of our bad news session. We can see, I think, if you've taken a lead or asbestos class, I think you can see a pretty significant difference between these three chemicals, right? They're all bad, but PCB has a longer shopping list of things in ways that it can harm us, right? Does anybody have any comments or questions about anything that we just went over? No? Wayne or Jim, you guys want to add anything before we get into the activity?
Yeah, I got I know these guys are asking the question, when do you test? When should you test? And what is the rule for OSHA and the EPA? Is everybody in agreement with that?
Okay, what I was wondering.
David, what do you think? He ain't getting off yet.
There you go. Yeah, that's a good question. They don't have to test?
They don't have to if unless they find it's not a hazard. But the big thing, Bernie, is the EPA's law and the OSHA law. I went and done a presentation for the head EPA lady from Houston, Texas. Her name is Mary. And we done it at the OSHA office in Little Rock. So I took this awareness class and took it in there and done a presentation for them. And the EPA is all for it. But OSHA kept asking me, what do you want me to do with it? So that's a Barney question right there. What do you think?
So we're going to cover this in a lot of depth tomorrow. But OSHA does have a permissible exposure limit for two.
That's all they have.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Yeah, boy, how come this is a great discussion.
Yeah.
Can they?
If you know that the building was built in a certain age, the employer should be at least doing exposure testing for air to satisfy the PEL, to make sure that you're not above the PEL. But there's no requirement for them to test the material that you're working on, right? And the requirement to test for the PCB PEL is going to be dictated and on whether or not the employer, the contractor, thinks that it's there. You know, so if they have a good industrial hygienist, the industrial hygienist should be pointing this out and require testing. But most cases, I can count on my hands a number of times I've come across a contractor, you know, it's even larger ones that have an actual industrial hygienist on their staff, you know. So this is why this awareness level class, and Jim and Wayne, you know, jump in here. I think this awareness level class is going to be a big benefit because it's going to let members know when they should be requesting air sampling done at the minimum. You know, the employer might be able to argue about not testing, you know, for material, but it's going to be a lot harder to make that argument that they shouldn't be testing for airborne exposure for workers if the building's built, you know, 1980 or less, 1982 or less.
Yeah.
They go by historical data like they would with maybe with a job of lead on a job. They can see the last contractor, what he used to paint with, or no?
So you can make an argument for that, but do you think they're going to be able to find records on somebody who painted a bridge in 1970? Or even a school? I think it would be harder in a school. I don't know.
Power plants are the same way, Bernie, with some of them were built back in the teens and the 20s, and they're demoing these buildings now, and that's how McCormick, which is here out of Little Rock, one of our union contractors, got involved with the PCBs, is the actual client tested it and found that the PCBs were off scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what got me started on this, because we have two contractors up in Northeast. The Massachusetts Water Authority, they're the one that actually put it in the bid documents that there was PCBs in it. And the other one's National Grid over there over there by the casino. Where is that? That's Somersworth area, I think. But anyways, they're the only two that I know of in Massachusetts that are actually doing the testing before the workers get on site.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something, you know, that I think every local union should have a good understanding of, especially, is it the business managers that might be developing new work, or whoever is responsible for developing new work should have a good understanding of this. Because one, it's going to protect your workers. Two, it could lead to more work.
There you go, Rick.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Testing for lead, say they're doing an air monitoring. Are they able to detect the PCB in that? I guess, or, well, I guess I'm trying to say they gotta be looking for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the lead test is not going to pick up PCBs. Lead is specific type of test back in the lab, and it's a specific way that I have to collect it to be able to send it to the lab to make it a valid sample. Good question. You can't do both.
I'm wondering how you could find it if they're not looking for it, but it's in there. Gotta be in there, you know? Just why they ain't checking for it. I just,
Well, again, historical data here, though, is on your side. Because if you're going to be working on a building that's 1975, right, and you've got some of that old caulking in there, the historical data is on your side saying, hey, this is probably PCBs,
yeah.
right?
So the only way to test for it would be to take a sample and have it tested.
Exactly. Or take
Yeah.
a specific air sample for
Right.
PCBs. Yeah.
Or a physical sample and send it off and tell them you want to test
Yep.
it for PCBs.
Yeah. So there was I'll try to dig up the article. Although I looked for it before and we were putting this together, I couldn't find it. There was a gentleman in the Massachusetts, Boston area that was doing a public good, and he was going around and taking samples of caulking on the outsides of school windows and doors, sending them in, getting it tested, and then notifying the school district, by which then the school district had to do something about it. So they tried to keep this guy off of school property, which you can't do because it's a public area. But once you find out it's there, you got to do something about it, right? And again, I understand why a school district wouldn't want to know because it's going to be expensive. And I'll share some news articles about this kind of issue, you know, that Wayne and Jim and I have come up with when we were putting the worker class together, and also when we were putting together that training conference that we went to there in last December. It's expensive, but it's the right thing to do because they're kids, right? And it's all your employees in the building, right? So with that said, Monisha, could we get some breakout rooms together, maybe some different groups that were built than yesterday?
Yeah, sure.
Set the timer for 15 minutes and
Okay.
to fill out activity 2. There are 10 questions.
Okay, do you guys all have the activity on hand?
Yes.
You should have been emailed to you by Nicole or FTI International. Great. 1 second. You said 15 minutes, Bernie?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, guys, I'm getting ready to launch the rooms. 1 second. All righty.
And I'm having trouble sharing it, so.
I got it up. I've already done it.
Sorry about that, guys. I'm back. I can't see it all.
Are you back?
Yeah, I mean, I can scroll. I think.
Yeah, you can scroll it, it looks like.
Of course, the first answer is true.
One of you guys need to write this down. I'll ask the questions and y'all can comment on it.
I can type it out. Ain't no big deal.
Okay.
No, they said we're doing this activity 2.
Activity 2, yes.
True or false? We are down. Can't hear you, Mike.
Yeah, his mic's off.
I was writing it down too.
All right, Manuel, you do it.
So
That way
first
you can
true.
talk to him.
I think I got
Any
it.
questions?
Oh, there he
Oh,
is.
you got it.
All right, the first one's true. I wrote it down.
All right. Any comments on that?
It's pretty much everywhere, so you can't deny that anybody has it.
Yes.
All right, number 2. Where are you most likely to be exposed to PCBs as a worker? And how about the general public? And you may have more than one answer.
Where are you most likely as a worker?
Yeah, where are you gonna pick this up at?
At work. Is they're asking what kind of work?
Right,
Yeah,
so it's
well,
everywhere, right?
It's everywhere. It's in commercial, guys. It's in the bridge work. It's in the industrial, the dams, marine.
All
It's
trades.
everywhere.
It's everywhere.
All trades.
And you got to understand, we are glazers too, and none of us are we? I don't think there's any of y'all glazers. It affects them just as much as it does us. Probably more so on the caulking.
Yep.
Okay, how about the general public?
Well, it's in the environment. It's in the foods. So they get exposure through foods and the environment mostly.
What if you get a bad contractor out there and spraying the dust out of the containment?
That's true too. Environment. Dust.
And if they're doing a bridge out in the middle of BFE and that stuff's spraying out on the fields and then it turns around and goes right back up in the corn and the beans and everything else.
Everywhere.
This stuff is just like lead, man. It's here. And we're just gonna have to get it pushed. All right. You got to discuss and list 3 acute and 3 chronic effects of PCBs.
Acute. You have skin, eye, and throat. Then you have, what's that?
Dave,
Breathing.
we can't hear you, buddy. You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, we got skin, eye, and throat irritation, breathing, and stomach pain.
What is that?
That's acute, right?
Yeah, it's acute. Okay, chronic. Okay, got liver damage. Reproduction damage. And cancer. I just lost everything.
Did you lose it all? You ready to move on?
Yes.
All right, number 4, describe the process of bioaccumulation and discuss the impact on public health. What is bioaccumulation, guys?
When it gets in the waterways or food source and some sort of livestock or the fish eat it and then it gets passed along to us down the line.
That's right. And how's that going to impact the public health? What about the farmers spraying the DDT around they're used to? And you know that stuff's still out there in the pastures and everything. I know it's at my place, we used it for everything. And even used it for hydraulic fluid in the tractors. Because my dad had barrels of it. He was a union electrician, so you can imagine. Burned a lot of dead cows with it. Dang, Mike. He just iced himself off, so.
Oh, Lord.
I think you got too many going.
Was there anything more to that question?
Yeah, the impact on.
Yes, yep. Yep. That's one way of putting it.
Basically.
Yeah.
You know, grass, the animals eat the grass. It's
Yep. Food chain pretty much takes care of it because you think about it.
Right.
Negative effect it has on soil, water, air. All right, number 5. List the top 5 foods.
Salmon.
What's that?
Salmon. It's
Yep.
salmon, steak, tuna in a can, vegetables, and chicken breast in that order.
And M&Ms.
Oh, yeah, M&M, the green one. Reliable information, Jimmy.
Which one after chicken breast?
Yeah, salmon,
Mhm.
steak is number 2, tuna in a can, vegetables, and chicken breast are the top 5.
Yeah. Number 6, go ahead and define and state the biological half-life for PCBs and discuss why it's important for workers and the public and describe its impact on human health.
It's a few days before 50.
Days.
Yeah.
The 450 days. Yeah.
Can be up to 450 days.
How many half-lives it's got to go through?
10.
Yep.
It's the time it takes for your body to get rid of half of the contaminant that you have.
Am I just putting negative impact for human health?
Yeah. All right, number 7. Discuss and describe why it's difficult to fully understand the harmful effects of work-related PCB exposures. What's the biggest reason?
It's not tested for.
That's it.
That and it mimics other contaminants like lead.
Yep.
Yep.
Number 8, true or false? Once the PCBs are released into the environment, they will break down into harmless chemical products.
False.
I mean, like eventually.
Hey guys, we have about 3 minutes left.
We're almost done.
Number 9, list
A lot
2
on there.
PCB exposure pathways and describe how they contribute to the PCB worker and
And guess what? You start right back over again, blasting again.
Yes, sir.
Hey guys, we have about 3 minutes left.
Y'all want to go to 7?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Discuss and describe why is it difficult to fully understand the harmful effects of work-related PCB exposure. Write some down, Mike.
Lack of testing.
Yes. Actually, lack of testing.
Lack of testing.
All right, number 8, true or false? Once PCBs are released into the environment, they will break down into harmful chemical products.
That's harmless.
It does say harmless, sorry about that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
It's true or false question. Once PCBs are released into the environment, they will break down into harmless chemical products.
No, that's false.
It's false.
Stuff stays there.
Yeah.
Number 9, whoop. List 2 exposures, pathways, and describe how they contribute to PCB worker and the general public exposure. How do you get it in your system, guys?
Inhalation and ingestion.
Yes.
Absorption.
Absorption.
Skin contact, guys. It's bad for you. And it's going to get into the public by them breathing it and also eating it. And number 10, research and list chemicals that may interact with PCBs. How are you going to do that? What does the chlorine do to it? That's what makes it dangerous. You got 30 seconds. "15 minutes is not quite enough, is it?" Oh boy.
Hey. Hey, Monish, are you there?
Yep, I'm here, Bernie. Looks like some people are still in the breakout rooms. They have 20 seconds left.
I meant to just leave the breakout room, and I think I left the whole training, so I had to come back on.
Uh-oh. Sorry, I didn't mean to assign you earlier.
Oh, that's okay. This everybody?
Okay, I think we have everyone, Bernie.
All right. So why don't we just go through these, and if somebody wants to take a turn answering them, somebody just chime in and say what you had for an answer. And if it's something significantly different, we'll add to it. How about number 1? Who wants to take number 1?
I will.
All right. What'd you get?
I wrote down true.
Yep.
You always go for the hard ones, don't you?
Oh, you gotta believe it, buddy. I know how to work it, man.
Yep.
Oh, that's
All right,
funny.
good. We saw lots of evidence for that one. How about number 2?
That would be all trades, man. I would think it would be in most of trades.
Yep. Yep. Got. So what are some of the materials that you might encounter that would have PCBs in it?
Well, we know oils and transformers. We know they have it in paints, ceiling tiles, and flooring, stuff like that, for an example.
And caulking, right? Don't forget about that stuff.
I've got removing coatings, the dust that you generate, food, the environment, and leaching off of structures.
Good. How about for the public? Where would the public be exposed?
Food, the food.
Food,
Environment.
Yep, in the environment. Good. How about number 3? List 3 acute and 3 chronic health effects.
Acute, skin, eye, and throat, breathing difficulties, stomach pain.
Good.
Chronic would be like liver, reproduction damages, cancer.
Good. Yep. And remember, there was a bunch of other examples for each category there. Describe the process of bioaccumulation and discuss its impact on public health. So what is bioaccumulation and why do we care?
Well, the little animals eat the bigger animals, and then we eat the bigger animals.
Yep.
It's a food chain deal.
Yep, the food chain deal. So a nanogram of material in the water does not equal that when we eat it, right?
That's 1,000th of a gram, or I mean, of a milligram.
Yep.
Microgram, I mean.
Yep. And so, but by the time something like that gets to us, we're talking milligrams, right? We're talking thousands of times.
Right.
Good. How about number 5? The 5 top foods that contain the highest per serving.
Salmon, steak, tuna in a can, vegetables, and then chicken breasts. And
Yep. So I don't think steak was up in the top 5.
Salmon steak.
Salmon and what was it? Salmon and steak is 2 separate. It's a salmon steak, not salmon and steak.
Yeah, it was salmon steak. So like you get a nice big chunk. Yep.
That was me.
That's the fancy way of saying it.
Yeah, salmon.
A swordfish steak, please. Pancakes was number 5.
Pancakes.
With a little New Hampshire maple syrup. Do I have anybody on from Canada who wants to fight me on that one? Canadian maple syrup? Nobody from Canada today? No? Okay. Number 6. What's the biological half-life and why is that important?
Time it takes for half of the contaminant to leave your body naturally.
Yep.
And you want to get rid of it as much as you can.
What was the value for it?
450 days for the 1 half-life.
Yep, that's right. That's a long time. Not as long as some of the radiological materials, right, if you work out on any of the DOE sites, but 450 days is a long time.
That's the maximum. I mean, it said it can take a few days, from a few days to 450. So some people metabolize it quicker than others, or?
No, it would be a different type of conjugar PCB, but the average is 450.
Oh.
Good point. How about number 7?
I had it mimics lead and other stuff as far as symptoms go.
Yep. What other issues around number 7 would you put in there?
It's not tested for.
Lack of testing.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I mean, how do you know? You can assume it's there, but how do you know? And if you get really sick, if something happens, unfortunately, sometimes workers are only left with a court of law.
How come if there's a PEL for it, they don't require testing?
Right. There's other chemicals, like you said, that are similar that can cause similar health effects as well. How about number 8? What did you get?
False.
Yep, false.
Stays dangerous.
Yeah, very hard to break down the environment. That's why, we showed some really nice photos there of trying to clean up the Hudson River Valley area. Literally, they got to vacuum the stuff off the bottom of the river. Number 9. What'd you get for number 9?
Inhalation for the worker and absorption for the public.
Ingestion.
Yep. Yeah, ingestion. Yep.
Oh, I damn sure did put inhalation.
So just as a caveat, when you ingest something, your body absorbs it through the GI tract. But if you get it on your skin or eyes, it can absorb it that way. But typically in like worker health training and stuff, we see absorption as being through skin and stuff like that. So that's how we refer to it. But it's actually absorbed no matter which route of entry you get it, unless it's an injection. Then it's going directly into your blood through a needle or a puncture, something like that. But otherwise, you inhale it, you ingest it, or it's absorbed through your skin. But those first 3 methods, it's all absorption at some point once it gets to where it wants to go, either to your lungs or through your GI tract. Research and lists chemicals that may interact with PCB. So did you find any chemicals that might synergistically interact with PCBs?
Nicotine.
What's that?
Nicotine.
Nicotine, okay. I had down a methyl mercury, because that's also something that pollutes our fish.
Mercury.
Do folks understand what I mean when I say synergistically? What does it mean for a chemical to interact with another one synergistically?
It means it's not just twice the effect, it's many times more.
Good, excellent, excellent. If we were just talking about twice effects, what would we call that?
Friday night.
Additive, right? So you can have a chemical that acts additively. So example, I drink a little tequila, little rum, right? It's going to act additively. If I drink tequila and then, I don't know, took a sleeping pill, that acts synergistically. So that doesn't add up. It affects me at some multiplier to make it worse. That's why synergistic chemical effects are terrible. And that's one of the issues when we work around chemicals, because we don't typically just get exposed to one, right? Typically, especially the painting and the allied trades, you're exposed to a bunch of chemicals at the same time. Other ones I had were dioxins or TCDD or PBDE, which is polybrominated diphenyl ethers. These are all components of pesticides. So that's our activity 2, and that concludes our module. Any comments, questions by anybody? Before we
dioxin is I thought dioxin was PCBs. They're just like them.
It's similar. So it's not PCB formula. It's a different chemical. It operates in a different way. And dioxins, they use it in a lot of building materials, and you often find it. I mean, the World Trade Center, when they collapsed, we sampled lots of dioxins in surrounding air, surrounding buildings, because of the infiltrated contamination of the dust. But we also found asbestos, lead, PCBs, everything else. So, yeah, dioxins are used a lot, in building material for certain things.
Mercury in that too, isn't there?
Yeah, yep. Any other comments or questions? Jim or Wayne, do you guys have anything you want to say before we sign off for today?
I got one. A question.
Sure. What's the question?
Household pesticide, stuff like that, is that PCB too?
I don't know. You'd have to check the label.
Yeah, I just wonder if you knew off the top of your head. I will check it.
The stuff you got down in your basement, probably yes, Rick.
M&M peanut green.
Oh man. All right. So if we don't have anything else, we'll see everybody tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and we're going to go through the regulatory parts. And this is where I think you're going to start to see putting the pieces together from what we covered yesterday and today. And it's also going to give you an idea of where you're starting as a worker at the start line. And you're going to probably see that you're starting farther back with PCBs than you are other chemicals, because the regulatory structure that we've got to rely on to protect us is not too good, right? That's why we really need a worker protection PCB law. With that said, everybody, thank you. I thought this was a good class, and we'll see everybody tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
All right.
All right, see you guys.
Damn, Jimmy.